Welcome everyone to this very special event in the MA seminar on life writing in English here at the University of Oslo. My name is Tina Skauen, and I am so happy that we have two of the best contemporary names from our current syllabus in life writing speaking to us live today. Our first speaker is Dr. Louisa Parker, aka Una, who is a British artist, illustrator, and writer with an international reputation. Dr. Parker is currently a visiting scholar at the Oxford Centre for Life Writing. She is the author of 4 graphic novels, including Becoming, Unbecoming, which has been translated into 6 languages since it first appeared in 2015. And this is also the book that we're reading in the course that I'm teaching here in Oslo. Our second speaker is Vanessa Baird, who is one of Norway's leading contemporary artists. She has given around 20 solo exhibitions and participated in countless group exhibitions in many different countries since finishing her education at the Norwegian Academy of Fine Art, and before that, the Royal College of Art in London. She has published 4 books, her most recent being There's No Place Like Home, which appeared in the middle of the pandemic and which is now on our life writing syllabus. But first, let's give a warm welcome to Louisa Parker. So Una, the floor is yours.
So, hello, I'm Louisa Parker, otherwise known as Una. So Una's not my real name. Lots of people ask me why am I called Una, and it's because I wanted to be one among many, and that's the first line of the book. My name is Una, Una meaning one of many, because I was aware that when I was writing the book that I was one of many. And at the time that I was writing it, which was, I started in 2008, 2007, 2008. It took a long time to do the research that I needed to do. So the book didn't actually come out until 2015. And at the time, there was no Me Too. There were lots of organizations around rape and sexual assault and around misogyny and femicide. There was lots of feminist activity, but none of the things that seem so natural to us now, ways of talking about these issues, none of that had happened. And in the UK, while I was writing the book, we had various really high-profile cases which I had to then incorporate into the text, because what started out as a book about why people don't report became a book about what happens when you report, what happens in the culture when you get very high-profile, very predatory sexual offenders. And it was a great experience to try to write a book like that as things were changing so quickly. And it kind of transformed the book a little bit, which was fine, but it is still essentially a story which takes place in a really specific time frame and a very specific place, a city in Yorkshire, which is a northern county in the United Kingdom. The city is Leeds, where there was a famous case of a man who was murdering women on the street, sexually motivated murderers and sexually motivated murders, and that the police famously couldn't catch Peter Sutcliffe. He turned out to be a lorry driver from a nearby city, which is Bradford, and that's the backdrop against which I grew up. So between 1975 and 1981, when I was between 10 years of age and 16 years of age, I was growing up being sexually abused and also listening to all the reasons why the kind of women who deserve to be murdered or the kind of women who deserve to be sexually abused, it's fine to murder them, and we only feel sorry for these innocent victims over here. Yeah, so that's the kind of backdrop that I was absorbing. And when I started writing the book, I knew the reason that I hadn't reported what happened to me, and I was interested to find out why other people hadn't reported. But what was really interesting to me was what effect does the culture and the society that we absorb as we grow, what kind of effect does that have on us as people? What kind of effect does that have on us as girls as we grow into women? And that's why it's called becoming, unbecoming. Because in English, obviously, the word unbecoming means something that's untouchable, something that's nasty, which is what I became through the actions of other people. And it's what the women who Peter Sutcliffe murdered also became through the actions of Peter Sutcliffe, despite the fact that they were just doing things like walking down the street, walking across the park, waiting in a van for their husband to come out of a club, just normal things like you and I do. Some of those women were painted as prostitutes or sex workers, as people call them nowadays, but actually very few of them were involved in the sex trade, but all of them were painted as though they were prostitutes. And the police couldn't catch Peter Sutcliffe because they thought the same way that Peter Sutcliffe thought about women and girls. That's why they couldn't catch him. I think it's a really, really interesting subject. And as you can see, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I spent 7 years researching. Before I did my PhD, I researched this book, and that's what made me realize I wanted to be a researcher. So research is kind of part of my life now. But it was spending all the time in the library, looking at things on microfilm. I looked at every newspaper, from every Yorkshire Post newspaper, from 1975 to 1981. It's a daily newspaper, and it took me a year. So I used to go every Thursday evening after work. I was working in the art school in Leeds. Every Thursday evening I went to the library and I looked at newspapers like this, flicking through, and when I found something interesting that was related to the Peter Sutcliffe case, or that was related to judgments made in courts about rape and femicide, I took a photograph of it and then I stored it and used it in the book. And lots of the material that's in the book was gathered through that research process. The other research in the book is to do with thinking with a pencil in my hand. So for me, I had always wanted to be a writer, and I always loved books. Maybe I didn't imagine myself as a writer until I started writing. I think that maybe that makes sense. And a little bit like I had studied feminism. I had studied Simone de Beauvoir and the second sex, and she says that in order to write about other things, she had to first write about herself. She had to first announce herself, and I thought, yeah, I can identify with that. So that's what I felt like I was doing. I wanted to move on and write about other things. So there's a book here which is about my mother who had a psychosis. There's a book here which is about the end of the world, climate change, the political climate in the UK, which is at the moment very, very difficult. And I've got another book as well with me, which is about a group of women who work in an empty shop in the middle of a very rural area in the north of England. And they help each other by making tea, bringing biscuits, doing knitting and sewing and making things and making friends, giving each other advice and so on, in an area where it's quite difficult. There's very little money and there's very little employment. It's a very long way from anywhere. So really interested in other people's lives. You know, this is my thing. And I'm really interested in research. And when I did my PhD, which was at Loughborough University, which is a good university for visual arts, I drew people's life stories and I interviewed women who were as old as my mother. So, because what I wanted to know was, these women who are now in their 80s, they lived through a period long before I was born, but they lived through all of the changes that happened all over Europe in the 1970s, when we started to get equality legislation. So in England, for example, a woman in 1975 couldn't have a mortgage in her own name. It wasn't possible for a woman to go into a bank and say, I'd like to buy a house, can I have a mortgage? And that's a big thing, isn't it? Can't buy a house. And in England, that was until 1983. Yeah. So all the kind of equality legislation, the Equality Act that came about mostly because of the civil rights movement, actually, in America, where sort of European feminists and American feminists looked at that and thought, okay, this is what we can do. We can change things. We can try and work out how to make things more equal. But women who are now in their 80s, they were born long before any of this happened. Yeah, so they've lived through the period when they couldn't do things. Then they've lived through the period when things were really changing very quickly, and then they've lived through the period which we've all lived through when it seems perfectly natural that you can walk into a bank and get a mortgage. Yeah, it's really interested in their lives and what would happen. So you can see that all of this little bio that I've put here, it makes sense in hindsight, like lots of things make sense in hindsight. But when I set out as an artist and as a writer, I actually didn't really know what I was going to do. I was just thinking about things, and I had a pencil in my hand, and that's it. I just turned up every day and drew something or wrote something. It's as simple as that, but it's the work of a lifetime. Yeah. So although I had done some zines, which this started as a zine, and so this is the first cartoon I ever drew, and I drew it in my lunch break at Leeds Arts University, and it was kind of the first time I looked at it and I thought, oh yeah, I like how I've drawn that. I had some kind of difficulty with, I don't know, I suppose because I'd trained in fine art, it didn't come naturally to me to draw comics, to draw cartoons. But the first character that I came up with this girl, Una, which is clearly based on me. And it's a little bit like I have a friend who called Jackie Fleming, who's also a cartoonist. She's much more famous than I am. And she's got a similar kind of avatar, but hers is kind of really messy. So we look probably a little bit like each other, but she's kind of got, her hair's a little bit more like that, and she's a little bit more kind of skinny and chaotic. So hers is kind of skinny and chaotic, and mine is kind of neat, which is like me, I'm very neat. And I thought, okay, so I just need something that's quick to draw, because I might have to draw it hundreds of times. I don't know how this is going to happen. But I've got this hair, which is sort of like this, and I've got these arms and legs. So I just kind of came up with a method of drawing spoons for my arms and spoons for legs, and little black shoes and a dress that changes colour from white to red. Yeah, just a really kind of simple thing. And that runs through the book. And then the balloon, of course, I mean, this is about, for a very long time, I couldn't speak about what had happened to me as a child. I couldn't speak about it at all, and if I tried to speak, it used to make me cry. So there were lots of times when I tried to talk about it and then just ended up crying and not really saying what I wanted to say. And when I was very young, I was actually sent to see a psychiatrist, which is in the book, and as if there was something wrong with me, which I think is quite funny now. It wasn't funny at the time. And there was nothing wrong with me, obviously, so there was nothing that I could say to the psychiatrist. So I just used to sit in silence in the doctor's room, and then I used to go home. But I did used to miss maths at school, so that was something. So the balloon is obviously, it's a typical comics balloon. Normally it's full of speech, but the 3 different voices in the book, which is Una as a child, so she's silent, and then there's kind of Una as a grown-up who's doing the kind of writing and looking back. And then there's also a kind of narrator as well. There's sort of 3 different levels of voice. I think that's also really interesting because in comics you can do that, and I think it's actually very difficult to pull that off in what would be a more standard, a traditional novel. I'm sort of interested in the mechanics of comics, even though I have to admit that I don't read a huge amount of graphic novels. Obviously I read some, but I'm actually more interested, or I was when I was younger, more interested in just standard, what people would understand as literature. So I'm coming at it from lots of different angles. So when I set out with my pencil in my hand and with my little bottle of ink, I tried not to overthink it, because I knew that it was a very difficult thing that I was trying to do. I knew that not very many people had attempted it before. I'd looked at what they'd done, and I'd decided that it was kind of, it wasn't what I wanted to do. It was too explicit, and I wanted to be much more metaphorical. So I just doodled, and it came out like this, and that became the style of the book. It really was as organic as that. Everybody likes these because most people can remember cutting out paper dolls as children, and I really like this as a way of understanding the kind of surface of femininity and the way you can kind of put it on and take it back off again. These are really things that I had. I really did have a nurse's outfit like that one. And that's what my brownie uniform looked like. They don't look like that anymore. And I really did have pants that said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on them. 1970s England, it was a very strange place. Some of the kind of context is to do with being northern. So in England, being northern is a very specific thing. Yeah, it's very difficult to be a northern person and be considered middle class, for example. Yeah, because especially if you speak with an accent, it's very difficult to go down south and people go, "Oh, you're from sort of up there somewhere," you know, and you're like, "Yeah, it's quite big actually," you know, but it's big enough to divide it into different sections. And there was a lot of arguing as I was growing up about how to divide the geography into little, you know, nice, neat slices. But there was also a series of murders happening that nobody could quite understand. And so during this time, people were working out what was happening. It was the first time really in the UK that there's been a series of very high profile murders all in one place. You know, it happens all the time in America, but this is one of the biggest police investigations that the UK has ever had. Now, because of Becoming Unbecoming, I often get asked to do really difficult and sensitive illustration jobs. So this is about CSE principles. So CSE is child sexual exploitation, which is a little bit different from child sexual abuse, because it generally means that a group of adults or an organised group of adults is exploiting younger girls or younger women by exploiting their naivety or exploiting their lack of care. Often these young children, actually, because there are boys involved in this as well, they're often growing up in care, in orphanages or in care homes. And they exploit the fact that they don't have adults who are protecting them. And sometimes they exploit things like they'll give them gifts or they'll give them money. And sometimes they'll exploit them because they've got disabilities and maybe some kind of cognitive difficulties. And I made these images with a group of young people who had all experienced child sexual exploitation. And this is with the University of Bedfordshire, who have a research centre which is about trafficking and violence. It's all available online, and if you look at my website, there's a link there that takes you straight through to the project. But you can see that these are quite happy images. Sometimes I go and give talks and people say, I wasn't expecting you to be quite this happy. I was thinking, well, yeah, I'm happy now. Maybe I wasn't happy then, but I am allowed actually to be happy, and we're all allowed to be happy. And these young people, they were also allowed to, to communicate the thing how they wanted to communicate it. These are based on their doodles. So what we did was we sat around a table, I gave them all a pencil, and I said, okay, you've described this thing, but what does it look like? So what does it look like when you can't see the same police officer? Yeah. So these are all visualizations from other people. And this is probably, I think, the start of my life writing career, because I really got interested in how other people visualize things, how other people start to say things. And there's a lot of that, although Eve is a fiction, there's a lot of overheard conversations, and very, very interesting how other people express themselves. So this, you can look at these books if you want these. This is the first cartoon I drew. It turned into a project, which I got public money for. We went around talking about mental health with my mum, who'd had a psychosis. She stood in front of an audience and explained what it means to have a psychosis, what it means to be treated without your consent, like being under arrest, and then coming out of that the other side and actually having a good life, because she's got a really good life now. She's fine, doing really well. And it's also a kind of tribute to my grandparents' house, because my grandfather was a poverty-stricken Irishman who had lost his parents in the First World War and gone to work at the age of 12. Now, I don't know if you know about what the British think about the Irish, but it's not good. So he had a lot of prejudice to face and a lot of obstacles to get over. And he walked every day past this house while he was working at the bakery. And he said, one day I'm gonna buy that house. And everybody laughed, which of course made him want to buy it even more. So after the Second World War, it had been full of soldiers during the Second World War, and it was very dilapidated. And so after the Second World War, he bought it for £1,000, and then he moved his family in there, and they lived a really happy life. That's where my mum was when she was going mad. And these are her words and my images. So there are things to do with the sequence here. This is her and her twin brother fighting on the stairs because he was trying to stop her from leaving the house while we were waiting for the doctors to come. This is the book that I told you about, which is about the group of women in an empty shop in County Durham, which is in the north of England, Stanley, County Durham. And it's a kind of a mirror book. It's a concept book. This character walks into the book at the front, and then she walks out of the book at the end, in the same way that a researcher does when you're researching people's lives. So it's a reflection of my journey into their life and then back out again. And each image has a twin at the other side that's slightly different. So she walks into the book, she gets on the bus, she comes into the town centre, she goes to the shop. The middle opens up like this and you see all the action in the shop, then it closes back up again, and then she gets back on the bus and then she walks back home again. Yeah, I'm very, very pleased with it. It's one of my favourite things that I've made. It really helps you to understand the kind of bleakness of the towns in the north, but also the beauty of the countryside. These are just some illustrations. This is a kind of illustration commission that I get, but again, they're always based on life writing. This is Sheila Rowbotham, who is quite a famous historian in the UK, and I drew her for a magazine. And then over here, this is for the Wellcome Trust, and this is about the pandemic. So it's about people journaling during the pandemic. So everything I do, because of Becoming Unbecoming, is based on life writing. And then that leads me to my last work, which is Eve, which is a fiction. However, this is a real place. So this stone here is on the moor near Haworth, which is where the Bronte sisters used to live. So is everybody smiling now because you know the Bronte? So where I live is near where the Bronte sisters used to live. So when you can walk on the moor, that's what it looks like. And the way I got the colours for Eve, so again, it's a fiction, but it's pinned down at all four corners. This is what Virginia Woolf said, that fiction is pinned down at all four corners by reality, yeah? And the way I got the colours was to go out and take photographs, and then I used my iPad to sample the colours from the photographs so that I could paint with the colours of Yorkshire, yeah? I made palettes I made different sky palettes, different stone palettes, and the book is about contemporary life. I mean, this sums it up. She's saying, don't look, it only makes you angry. And I think that we can all relate to that. I just felt like we should have gratuitous childbirth. There's also a head crowning. And always a good excuse to draw chickens, because they're amazing. Chickens are amazing. And this is where we're all headed, in my opinion. I have wanted to draw a dystopian book for quite a long time, and I had a lot of fun with it, I have to say. I'm just worried that maybe, you know, I might have been making all of this happen. Hope not. And if you want to look at my work later, you can follow me on all my social media as Things by Una, and that's my website. And that's it. Thank you.
So thank you to Una, obviously, that helps society, it's good for society. I'm an artist and a daughter, and I'm a mother, and I'm a mother, and I'm a mother's caretaker. I've been living in the same house with her for 58 years. That's my whole life, and she's now 91. She's an artist, and she became a psychiatrist to make a living for us when they divorced. Good move. That's why I was here in the first place. So I've made this book that's called There's No Place Like Home. which was a title, I actually just nicked it from a painting. I saw it on the frame in the British Museum, and I thought, that's a nice title. And this is the way I work. I draw all the time anyway. I live in this house, and I've got 3 kids. They're grown up. They're 17, 19, and 21. And I work all the time, you see. So the thing is that I didn't sort of had a plan to make it a book about the pandemic. I just do the drawings, and then, as it's the most accessible thing which I've got in front of me, sort of as props. My mother is my prop. She's my main model. I used to call her my evangelista. She used to be a model. I mean, not my mother, but evangelista. She was a famous model in the 80s. And I would use my surroundings. I would have wallpaper in all my pictures. I would have mantelpiece. I would have... I actually don't have a living room at home. I've never had a living room. But I need a living room to have as a stage for my sort of drawings. So claustrophobic. I would like to go out to nature and make beautiful drawings into the woods and stuff, but I don't go out in the nature. So I almost always stay at home. 7 days a week, all year round, always in the same address. It's not very exciting, is it? But then when I travel, I can't do my work. I'm not one of these people that sort of sit down in a sort of different environments and think, oh, they're going to get loads of stuff out of this. I just get paralyzed. I think it's interesting, but I have to have the calm situation at home. But then I draw all these images. I draw these images. I draw myself in wallpaper. I would draw myself a nice living room, and then I'll have these people which are close into my life. In this situation, then the corona disappeared, didn't it? So that was the 8th of March 2 years ago. And I remember the date as I was in this discussion and I was in this panel, and I didn't want to shake people's hand. And they were going, what are you strung up about? I said, I couldn't say, it's a corona, because it was completely new and it was a bit sort of, we've heard about it on the radio and the Guardian and everything. I thought, I'll just say that I've got herpes. It's a way to deal with it. Makes it much more easy. And they were going, oh, that's horrible, nasty. We'll keep off. So that was the way to deal with that. You always get your ways through it, don't you? So then I stayed at home. These kids, they had to have homeschool. That was them on the computer. I'm a dyslexic, the youngest kid is a dyslexic, and it's not a very ideal situation, is it? Being a student behind the sort of, like your, what's called iPads. And I was worried, but I was always working. So the situation wasn't that much different for me from sort of rest of my life. As I said already, I'm always at home anyway. So, except from I was worried about them going mental, as we were always in. And I was always in. My mother, she was disintegrating. She had dementia, which is a long, long trip. And it's sort of seeing your best friend or like your mother or somebody you really like disintegrating, sort of doing, well, strange things and annoying things. And being a caretaker is rather difficult in the way, challenging in the way that I didn't find I was good at it. In November, I thought I had to, this is enough. Well, other people told me, you're not good at this anymore because you're getting angry. So the thing is that I put all these drawings, I draw all the time, and it's not sort of I think that I should draw the corona, but then the corona did really appear, didn't it? So affected everyone's life. I made all these drawings, and then I ended up with a pile of 70 paintings. I went down to my publisher, and he's really nice. He's got this minute publishing. And then I'll give him all these drawings, and he said, we'll make a book. And they withdraw, like, I had like sort of a thing when it was this author that committed suicide, which was, they talked about in the newspapers. And I was being terrified of finding people which are dead in my own life. Not that anyone in my near surroundings, but I had sort of frantic thing about this. So I drew, for instance, like 10 different ways to commit suicide, to do overdose and this kind of stuff. And obviously those drawings couldn't go into this book because it would have misled. You want to kind of make a story because there's no really beginning, but there is obviously an end, the last page. The corona, tiring, it was just the same all together. It went on this kind of uptight atmosphere staying at home. It was going up a little bit as a crescendo. Does it make any sense? Sort of a little bit louder. So this is the way I work. I mean, like I did sort of wallpaper drawings, sort of, you know, like more political sort of things about drowning in the Mediterranean and stuff like this, because everyone was, you know, didn't give a shit about that people were, everyone felt it was wrong that we didn't rescue people when they tried to make a better life for themselves. So I wanted to make that as a wallpaper as it was kind of steaming into everyone's consciousness, but still everyone knew, and they never said it loud, we actually don't care in the amount to get them out of it, to make this, you know, trip safe. So we would argue in Norway, for instance, of having 3 or 4 refugees in Syria, even if they're Norwegian, we don't want to get them over. We lost our justice minister, the minister of justice, because they have like, and everyone sort of feel that this is strong, something strong about it. You can get that into your artwork, but you don't need to press it too hard. You don't want to kind of be in, I can't handle my work doing something nice if I'm not in the kind of, have sort of, you know, genuine, I'm worked up about it and kind of just slides into the paper. So as you see, the narrative part is very, it's all very much reputation in the work I do. I'm afraid all the books are kind of similar. The notes, I have to tell you, it's my mother's genuine notes. The people which are living with old people, they would always have the same notes, desperate notes written in the middle of the night, asking for help, some sort of, you know, just trying to kind of have, lower their voice or whatever. There's always a very sort of desperate context to this. Maybe some love messages, but most of the time it's a bit shout out. And I would have a huge suitcase under my bed because I knew if I'm going to be a caretaker, I have to use it as for my material, but it's not going to be worth it looking after her if I can't use her in my artwork. And that's ethical, obviously. How far can you go and sort of adopt other people's props and pictures and this and that? But for me, that's easy because I'm not that interested in taking an ethical stand. It's my material. I live it. That's my life. My real life is much worse than any kind of drawing could be anyway. So that's the kind of payback, is the way I would kind of adopt all this kind of trauma or annoying or boring. 360 days a week, 24/7 is hard work, but still it's worth it as she's my model. Do you get it? Do you kind of make sense? So it's kind of a living diary or a notebook if you want. So it's a very easy way to work because there's always access. You always got access to your material, which is lovely. So I would really recommend that. That's why Knausgård did it well. When he wrote this book, it's not about what he's writing about, it's the way he does it. So I think that's the only way I could rescue myself is being kind of good at drawing, but I have been practicing for over 50 years. I've been drawing for 60 years soon. So I think really I could, if I had raised my eyes, I could have sort of maybe done other stuff which is a little bit, you know, more general, but sort of digging into my navel more or like, or into my sort of imaginary living room, I've got enough material to get me going through the life. I don't need anything more. But maybe, I don't know, I have to make a new book now which is called A House is Not a Home, because everyone left except for me. So that's going to be different, maybe. Mother's not there anyway in the picture, so yes, terrible. But anyway, that's the way it is. People disappear, they've got their time. My time is over and that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louisa Parker and Vanessa Baird, for doing these presentations, these wonderful presentations. And we are now going to have a panel discussion between the two of you.
Una, I think it was really interesting the way you were talking about being at an art school, and then you did your cartoon stuff in the lunch hour.
Yeah.
In your break.
Yeah, in my break.
That's interesting because I think if you were male, I think you would have barked really loud about that, where you did make your artwork, as a lot of people said, to the kitchen table. It's a little bit like doing kitchen table artwork, isn't it?
Yeah. Which is not really what I do. Isn't it weird that I've come at it from a completely different
You come
angle.
from the fine arts.
I come from
doing
the fine
comics.
arts, but yeah, I'm more of a writer than a drawer. It took me time. I had to learn how to draw the things I wanted to draw in the way I wanted to draw them. It didn't come very naturally. Whereas what you're describing is something different. That your struggle is with words, whereas words are I like words. They're
I
my
know,
thing.
you see, that's really interesting because we are really from the opposite direction. I wanted to go into the fine arts, but then I thought, I'll just go one degree further down, which I thought the illustration was. And then I would reply in the department, and they took me in without knowing that I wasn't actually able to do what they wanted me to do. And we got all these, lovely sort of novels out of sort of Russian and this and that, sort of nice novels, the classics and stuff. And I wasn't actually able to get through them with not sort of, I can't read. I mean, I have been reading all my life, but it's not sort of, I thought it was difficult to kind of have a text and then solve it. And I tried to do that sometimes. And I got strung up, I got nervous, and I kind of got high shoulders to try to kind of, figure out how to do something to the text. But what I really did was I actually wrecked the text. And I did that now with a story for the kids, sort of as a grim story for the kids. And it's just too, what's it called, extreme. The drawings are just full of energy, And the text is rather sort of German, sort of repetition, yeah. And then you come over sort of intense drawings, a wolf, and it's like too much, and rabbits and whatever. And then sort of the text I didn't leave the text to itself in its own beauty. And I think actually wreck the text. So I think that's also sometimes happens, sort of take over a little bit. Yeah.
Speaking of authentic sort of representation, what would you say is the most authentic thing in your work? If you think in terms of becoming, unbecoming, and there's no place like home, what are the most sort of authentic real life elements? Because I know that there are elements that are pure fiction.
I have some difficulty with the word authentic, really, so I'm not even sure what it means.
What does it mean?
For some people in the UK, authentic has some signification of class, social class. And I know that for me, because of my accent, because I'm clearly from the north of England, I'm often on a panel, I'm the authentic guest.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you're sort of the alibi.
So I have a few issues with the idea of that. The other thing as well is that authentic seems to mean something to do with the exposure of your emotions or something to do with self-expression. And what I'm doing has got nothing to do with self-expression. It's only about crafting images and crafting words. And the fact that I'm writing about life, my life or other people's life, is almost, it's not irrelevant exactly, but it's not the most important thing that's happening. The most important thing that's happening is that I'm bringing words and images together and creating something. I'm personally really interested in other people, what they've got to say, what's happened to them, what they think, what their lives are like. But first and foremost, I'm a writer and I'm an artist, more or less equally, I would say. And although I always drew and I loved drawing and I loved drawing people, and I also thought about studying illustration because I liked drawing people and I thought, I could do lots of that. But I knew that I was drawn towards fine art because I was drawn towards thinking deeply about images and talking about philosophy and all that kind of thing. So I am glad that I studied fine art, but I couldn't find a place for drawing and I couldn't find a place for drawing life. And actually when we were talking earlier, we were talking about the kind of crossover, weren't we? So I've gone completely off the topic, but yeah, I have some difficulty with the idea of authenticity. I have no idea what it is, and when it does come up, it seems to describe something that's not true, and so anti-authentic. But also because I think that people are looking in the wrong direction. In order to express your humanity, you first have to learn a craft and a way of doing that. And if you look at Vanessa and my work, for example, I mean, it couldn't be more different. It couldn't look more different. And a little bit like, I personally believe everybody can sing. Yeah, you just have to learn the notes that you can sing. Don't try to sing the notes you can't sing. Sing the notes that you can sing, and then you'll sound lovely. And I think that writing and painting are the same thing. You just have to paint like yourself. Yeah, or you have to write like yourself. You have to find a way to put it together that's meaningful for you. And there are conventions that you can follow. There are skills you can learn that everybody understands. But ultimately, becoming an artist, making something that's really sublime, that's a journey that each person kind of goes through, and it just comes together. And at some point you start to think, this is it. This is the thing I've been trying to do. This is the thing I've been trying to make. Can you identify with that?
Absolutely, and I think sort of it's also to do with not trying too hard. Sort of, it's like, as you say, your books and your like artistic process is also like sort of a lifetime. You've been working on all these sort of things, your own experience, even if it's not you. It's like all your sort of be sitting there drawing and writing and looking and watching other people. So I think it's also, I started to, when I came back from Britain, I went to the academy here to get some friends. I didn't have no social sort of network, so I took 1 year in the school here, and then I thought, I want to be a proper artist. I want to do some oil painting. But then, you see, it's difficult to do. You have to have the self-confidence to do the oil painting. And that's a different kind of ego than I've got. And I was never sort of secure. So then I kind of fucked it up in images. It went all weird. I had sort of, like vases and stuff and sort of things that wouldn't sort of relate to me at all. I would camouflage, not being clear what I was doing. So the paintings were a bit sort of looked like painting, but they weren't really something that was really good. So when I did my, final show, I went back to the drawing as to be secure, knowing what I was doing, because then I felt free again. Because that's just so possible, you've got access to the paper, and it's not sort of as you have to kind of be nervous. I wasn't nervous for the paper. And I can see people have sort of, that fluid thing on the oil thing, and it's just beautiful, wonderful, the way they write, the way they do the poetry and everything. You think, oh God, this is lovely. But that's just because they're not that nervous. They have sort of, it's not really what you say, is how you say it, isn't it? So even sort of really, I think really nice people can do shitty artwork, and really nasty people can do really good books. So it doesn't really, that's not, so you don't need to kind of get worried. There's always something for everyone there to kind of work on.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that as well, because I'm thinking that I also thought I wanted to make proper art. And so when I was working in the fine art field, didn't have as much success as I have done making stories, visual stories. I'm not even sure what I do actually. But I was doing I was working with storytelling modes. So a lot of my work told some kind of story, but I was making films and sound installations and things like that.
Really?
I was never drawing. Sometimes I used to draw when I was working things out, or I just used to draw because I liked drawing. But I couldn't find a way to bring the drawing into that until I started making
the lunch hour drawings.
The lunch hour drawings.
Well, good. That's really important that you had this lunch hour.
Yeah.
Because your project is also kind of bigger than yourself, I think, in the way that you have this social, sort of as a impact, which is to make it sort of take care of the society and talk about all these things, which is, yeah.
And my lunch hours were, because I was quite frustrated, I only worked part-time, and I did have plenty of time actually to make my artistic practice, but both of those things were frustrating at the same time. So I didn't particularly, when I was at work teaching, even though I liked teaching and I liked my students, I really liked working with students, I was frustrated because I wasn't making art. And then when I was making art, I was frustrated because I wasn't making the kind of art that felt satisfying. So all of it was frustrating.
Well, we've all been there.
But then meanwhile, I was spending a lot of time in the library because I've always loved books, and I've always spent a lot of time in the library. Even when I was really small, I just used to be always reading and always in the library. So that was where I used to go to feel comfortable. But I was reading a lot of the journals that we used to get. And at the time, there was a big explosion of serious comics. You know, it was after Mouse came out by Art Spiegelman. And then I was really interested in what Chris Ware was doing. Don't know if you've looked at his work. Lots of different kind of graphic reportage works that were around at the time. So I was reading in journals and thinking, oh, wow, this is really interesting. This is what I want to do. I want to write about real things, people's lives, and I'm going to draw it. But I actually didn't know how to do it. And I had been working in an art school for quite a long time. I hadn't been an artist for a very long time. I finally did finished my fine art degree when I was 30 or 32. I can't remember how old I was. And before that, I was a musician. So
Really?
actually, it took a little while for me to kind of get there. And even when I got there, I was kind of floundering around for a little while, looking for the thing that I wanted to do. And but seeing other people do it and not knowing how to get there. I mean, actually, being a musician is really good grounding for this, because you know that you've just got to sit there and keep doing it until you get it right, and there isn't any other way of making it right. You know, you just got to keep sitting there going like this, and eventually it's okay. So you need a lot of patience, and you need a lot of...
Well, sounds like it. If
Yeah. So that's what I did. I just sat there every lunch hour with a pencil, drawing, and eventually it started to fall into place.
That's the thing. That's because you were not nervous of what you were doing. You were not so pretentious.
Yeah, because
about
nobody
it.
was supposed to see it.
That's the
It
thing.
was just in my sketchbook. Yeah, I was not nervous. That's right.
In terms of the audience's reactions, what are the main benefits of sort of using autobiographical materials and elements? What do you sort of hope to achieve? What types of effects, or do you not sort of want to think about that at all, like audience's reactions?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
I think I've got an answer. I think when I started becoming, I was drawing it for myself, but it took so long to draw it and write it that by the time it was published, I was thinking, oh yeah, I really hope people will find this meaningful, actually. And I really hoped but I didn't know that it would land like it did. And I was worried about the drawings that I did of the 13 women that Peter Sutcliffe murdered. I was really worried that that was a horrifically offensive thing to do. Well, when I was drawing it, I was thinking, is this beautiful or is it horrible? I don't know. But I really wanted to imagine those women, had they survived to be middle-aged women like me. So all those drawings at the end of the book, those are based on anything that I could find out. I couldn't find out very much about some of them, but anything I could find out about each of those women, I kind of imagined. I thought, okay, so what would this person be doing had they survived to be whatever age they would have been if they were still alive? And then I kind of made a drawing out of it. But I honestly, again, it was before Me Too. I didn't know whether people would be really not into it, you know. So it was just really nice that it was received in the way it was, and that people immediately started to email me from all over the world, and that's continued. It's kind of slowed down a little bit now over the last year or so, but I'd get emails and messages from all over South America. Actually, it's done really well, from Chile, Argentina. I've been to Brazil to help some people make it into a play. All over Europe, the United States, especially because it's been taught in a lot of universities, and I take every single email really seriously. And although I have kind of particular things that I always say, I don't reply until I've got time to sit down and read the email properly and make a proper response. So I take it really seriously, actually, this responsibility, because it is a responsibility. I'm sometimes the first person that people disclose to, and that's a big responsibility. And
So the resilience work, you kind of glue the whole thing back again.
Yeah.
When everything is destroyed, you kind of put the... It's like
That's exactly how it's worked.
Yeah, it's like caretaker work in the bigger context.
In
kind
a
of thing.
bigger context, in a bigger kind of sphere.
That's why
outside
you're a
of
doctor,
myself.
Parker. Good.
But that's why these kind of very human works that we're making are important, isn't it? Because I know that when I'm looking at your images, I'm thinking about my mother actually as well. I'm thinking about, you know, some of those paintings where it's kind of just a face appearing out of the mist. There's something, there's just something very human about them, and actually faces, babies can make out just. We all have the capacity, don't we, to make a face from 2 dots and a smudge. You know, we immediately want to see faces in it, and I think your drawings or paintings of faces were my favourite parts of your work.
No, I think also it's kind of making all this stuff all the time, which I do. I think it's more easy. It's not like there's any therapeutic about it, but I like the idea that when it's kind of borderline situation, I'm in sort of shoved up in sort of vest of obligations, looking after something or this and that. Like washing my mother's, she had a shower every morning, and washing her hair. It was like sort of holding her skull. It was like holding my own head. It was like sort of everything grow into each other. It's like sort of you are like the same movement as symbiotic part of the same body. It sounds a bit strange, but still. Most people experience this 1 or twice, hopefully not more, in their life. Or it's like having, you know, when somebody gets a baby, they think it's the first person on earth that ever received a baby. It's kind of these things, but it's a very sort of nice, it's a very sort of accessible material because it's part of your own body and your own experience. And then you can go to the longer length to do the physical work, to actually sit and do the artwork. That's why I say there's no limits what you can bring into the art world. And having a discussion about what ethical or not is difficult for me to actually accept, in the way that it's more difficult to think that all these women are doing all this work without getting paid for it, or getting, you know, like sort of, well done, this is well done. Like you do all these kind of never-ending projects. And I think that should be more sort of gratified as something important, without, and then also then using that in your artwork is very sort of, yeah, it's my world, I can do whatever I want with it. Even, you know, her clothes or videos I made, every morning I would go in with my mobile and I would film her in a terrible state. You know, she was in a terrible state sometimes, angry, and somebody asked me sort of, that's not very ethical done of you. I was saying, well, that's my world. The world is much worse, or much more sort of also interesting in a way than making a bloody drawing. It's also very tiring, boring to make all these drawings. Also, it takes loads of work, you know, energy. You kind of, you always get sort of tired of making all this artwork. It's tiring work, it's hard work. But then on the other hand, I think that the possibilities that lies in that, so that's my material, you know, I would have that without sort of thinking, if I can use her as my model, I can go much further doing the job, because it's worth it. I've got it on tape. Who wants to see this video? I want to see the video, and it's going to be terrible. I'll put some nice music on it.
Do you show the video to others?
Well, I can maybe do that one day. I can cut it up together.
I think it's interesting because there really are ethical implications there.
Yes.
But it reminds me also of the retrieving of the French Impressionist painters, the women, because they were not seen as being proper painters, because they were painting their children and their friends, and, you know, sitting around in the garden having tea, whereas the men were kind of out in society painting people dancing, people bathing and getting undressed, you know, naked women and all that. This is what's seen as proper art. And whereas the French Impressionists, the women were confined to the house, because the only people who had the freedom of the city were, you know, working class women. So these middle class women who had the time and the energy to paint, the only thing that they could paint was what was in front of them. What was in front of them was other people. But where my ethical implications, because obviously I've also made a work about my mother, and it was about her being mad, but she could consent fully to what I was doing, because we didn't work on it together until she was fully well. And I am quite careful, because I think issues of consent, especially around the kind of themes that I'm dealing with, are incredibly important. very, very careful about what I say about what other people have told me, for example. And I'm very careful about responding to people who write to me and I'm the person that they disclose to. But also because people quite often ask me, can you help me? I want to write my life story. I want to draw my life story. Can you help me do it? I've actually just done some ethics training as part of my Oxford life writing scholarship, because I do want to do that. And I've started getting some funding for groups of creative writers. And I've registered a company in the UK so that that would be our work. We would help people who have suffered any kind of sexual or violent crime. And we would help them use creative means to communicate what happened to them.
You're going to have very many applications to this
We already
invitation.
have. Yeah,
you're in big difficulties.
But it's very, very sensitive work.
I know,
you have to be
it sounds
really
like
careful
it, yeah.
about what.
But when it's your own material about yourself or on your own family,
yeah, that's totally different.
It is different, and still, my mother obviously is not coming out on the other side in a nicely way. But still, that was my material, and I haven't shoved it out in an exhibition yet, and I maybe will not do it. I'll just have to. But as long as I'm comfortable thinking, so, oh, this is a nice form, I can cut it together and make a nice. Like put on music or something, add something to it. It's not going to be you can maybe get somebody into tears by sort of thinking, is this disintegration? Is this how most people in their life sort of falling their dignity? They're not professors, they're not farmers, they're not even looking after the kids. They are beyond that. They are just, harassment for their environment. They put them into homes. I put my mother into homes, the worst thing I've ever done to anyone, but still, we had this beautiful thing going, and we still have that, and I will sort of bring her with me the rest of her life, but still, she's my main axis for my material. And just, as I say, feel free to do whatever I do with it. But you might not like it, you'll maybe hate it. Maybe my sister will put me to court, I don't know. But still, it's worth it, isn't it? In the way that, as long as you know your own material.
And as an artist, you can make it beautiful.
I'll try. I'll try to do my best.
You are making it.